Welcome to Morgan's Game Therapy, a channel where you listen to a random stranger on the internet talk about TTRPGs and give unsolicited advice to problems that don't concern me. I hope your day and weekend is going well, and I hope you enjoy the video. We're back to RPG horror stories today, with the second installment in the series. I can make a playlist out of this now, if anyone actually wants to see that. For anyone confused, in these videos I read stories from Reddit that describe horror experiences from TTRPGs, and talk about them from my perspective as a longtime player and dungeon master, and sometimes just make fun of things. A little bit. Just a tad. Just a tiny little sassy tad. Let's get into it! What not to do with novice players. Also, the most useless wand ever, by Word Wizard. Note, this is about 15 years ago when I was a D&D newbie, so I may be misremembering a few details. Just roll with it. So I didn't discover D&D until I was already in my 20s. My now wife and I ended up playing 3.5 with a group of friends who were all in a similar boat, only our DM had actually played more than a few sessions previously. He was meticulous about doing everything absolutely by the book, no homebrew, no house rules, and, most important for this story, all loot was strictly randomly generated. Of course, since the rest of us were new, our builds were all over the place and not particularly well optimized. We battled our way to the top of a monster-filled tower and accumulated a smattering of loot, much of which we couldn't use. The jewel-encrusted bagpipes come to mind. We had no bard. We also had no way to figure out what the various enchanted items were, so we just threw them in our inventory and resolved to sort it out back in town eventually. So we get to the top of the tower and face off against the big bad. None of us had enough D&D experience to know what it was OOC, and we all rolled badly in our in-character knowledge checks, so even now I'm not sure what it was. Something troll-like, I think. We square up, threaten something cliché, and start the fight. And promptly start losing. Big time. None of our attacks seem to be doing much, even when they hit, and we have no idea why. Our casters and health potions are depleted in short order. We can't retreat. Now, with another 15 years of D&D and some DMing of my own under my belt, I look back and see things I would have done if I were our DM. Drop hints about the big bad having effing regenerate, for example, and or fudging numbers so I didn't wipe the party. Our DM didn't do that. As a last-ditch effort, we start pulling out the various unidentified weapons we'd acquired and try them out. My wife is all out of spell slots, fires with an unknown magic wand, and is told, "You sense there's a hidden door that unlocks somewhere in the floors below you." The party wiped. There was no plausible Deus Ex Machina. At the end of the session, our DM admitted he realized halfway through that he'd actually made a math error in calculating the party's damage reduction against the big bad's hide, but decided it was better to be consistent and kill us all than say anything. One of our other friends stepped up to be the DM of the new campaign the next week. This is a bit of a difficult situation for me personally, because I can kind of see both sides. I do agree with the OP. Let's start with that. I agree that this is not the way you should introduce new people to D&D. It doesn't seem like there was much communication, and the DM didn't properly explain what kind of game he was running. Maybe he was expecting the players to have read the player's guide from cover to cover, while the players were clearly expecting an easier experience to ease them into the game. This is why session 0 is important. This is also why communication is important. I'm pretty sure I say this every video. Communication between player and DM is key. Outline your expectations, otherwise they will not be met. But yeah, most of the time you don't want new players to be overly stressed about dying. It sucks to lose your character that you had been so excited to create in the first few sessions, right? No one wants that, and it makes a bad first impression. Probably not a good idea to do that, unless they're really into that kind of game, in which case, go nuts. Now, that being said, I don't agree with what a lot of the comments for this post were saying, that the DM is illogical and nonsensical, that DMs in general should be easier on new players. Would I do what this DM did? No, not personally, but then I also don't run my games by the book most of the time. a lot of the rules in my game are either rule of cool, rules I thought of at the moment because I couldn't remember the rules, or house rules. Just D&D makes it easy. Pathfinder, I'm still learning, so yeah. Now, I don't know much about 3.5, but I do know that 5e has a lot of dumb rules that I find really annoying, so I just don't use them or change them in some way. And there's also areas that don't have enough rules that you just completely have to make up stuff for, like ship combat doesn't really have a lot of stuff for it. Space combat or space astral sea travel has very limited stuff for it. It's very limited mechanics, even after Spelljammer came out. It's very disappointing. Anyways, that's how I run my games. I am very freeform with the rules. But this DM was clearly going for a difficult by-the-book game. Some people enjoy that style of play. Some people enjoy using random loot tables. I know, outrageous, but I know people like that. There's people who enjoy the random tables for everything kind of concept. And that's perfectly okay. Heck, some people straight up refuse to fudge dice, no matter how crappy the situation is for the party, because they feel that it diminishes the stakes and ruins the game for them. And that's fine too. You're here to enjoy it. If the DM isn't enjoying it, then the game isn't going very well. A DM is a player as well. They get to enjoy. What isn't okay with this DM is that they didn't outline their expectations for the party. A party of newbies, mind you, that don't know what the basic usual expectations are for D&D tables. They didn't check in with the party and their expectations, didn't, assumedly from the story, figure out if their expectations aligned. I always harp on this, and I will keep doing it. Communication, communication, communication. If you don't tell people what you want from them, you will never get it. And if you don't ask them what they want, then you can't provide, and you'll just be giving things that they don't want, don't need, didn't ask for, and you'll be at an impasse and angry at each other for seemingly no reason. Communication is important for DMs, especially between DMs and players. It should be important, should be the first thing that you go for in any game, period. Now, I do have two things to comment on before we move on to the next story. They're kind of minor, possibly nitpicky, but, opinion and all. First, on the math error that the DM made. I can see both sides of this as well. On one hand, consistency is king in a lot of D&D games. A lot of DMs consider this to be very important, myself included. There are times when I refuse to let people do certain things or play certain things because it would break the consistency of my world. I also run by the rule of once it happened in the game, it's canon and it cannot be changed. So if you've used a feat at any point in the game, you cannot change it anymore. If you haven't used a feat that you got from your last level up or something and you just figured out that you can't use it, then that's fine. If it hasn't been featured, you can change it. If it has been featured, you can't. Same with backstory things. Now, does this mean I would never rewind a particularly terrible event? No, but I can understand why this DM didn't want to change what has already happened, or that he didn't want to fudge dice. I don't enjoy fudging dice. I think that cheapens the experience, but then I also roll a lot of nat 20s, and that's a lot of crits, and my party doesn't roll very well, so I want them to live. Oh, I'm sorry, guys. It's not my fault. On the other hand, it's definitely something he should have addressed some other way in-game to allow the party to succeed. Or at least allow them a way to get out of the fight if beaten, but alive. I am generally against encounters that have one way out. Typically the ones that combat or death, no other answer. If I did that, I would have a lot of dead PCs, just because my combats are very difficult, and I think it's good character growth for sometimes your players needing to run away. They'll come back later, they can get stronger and do other things, and it'll give them motivation to keep doing things. But yeah, I think the biggest issue here is the lack of communication. Mostly on the DM's part, because remember, new players don't know what the social expectations are yet. They don't know the rules. The DM, being the only veteran sort of player, in this group should have been the one going, hey, we need to talk about things, like here's what I expect, what are you guys looking for in this game, let me know, tell me all about it, we can work something out. That's on him. It sucks that because of this, a group of new players had a bad experience. That's always sucky. I hope your friends, OP, also kept playing D&D. It looks like you stayed in it for many years, so yay. It's a learning experience at least, so there's that. Content warning. Periods and discussion of them. The one about the player that asked to be nerfed by Rakanti D&D P2E. Here's a short and mild one. It's still very fresh in my mind as it only happened yesterday. I ran a level 3 D&D one-shot for a group of 6 newbies to 5e and 1 experienced player. All the players are male and everyone is playing a character that shares their own gender except for Katana, a human eldritch knight fighter that wielded their titular blade, a reskinned longsword, and had a fox familiar. We had a session 0 where they learned the basics of role-playing combat. Everyone had fun, even though the combat was bogged down by the sheer number of players. No red flags were raised by the fighter. They played an honorable and passionate woman that fiercely opposed the rest of the party when they started plotting to steal a saddle from the local leather worker. Before the start of the one-shot, when everyone was ready to start playing, the fighter's player piped up, "Can I talk to you about my character? Right now? Before the session starts?" "Yes, but I don't want to speak with the rest of the players about this. I'm writing you a message." Thinking it was probably some backstory stuff, I opened all reliable WhatsApp web and looked at the chat. "Hi. Question. Is it a problem if Katana happens to have her period?" I was stunned for a solid 5 seconds. Then I looked at the player. I did not reply to the message. Instead, I spoke to him aloud. "Why?" "Well, Katana is a young woman. It's only natural." "Biologically, sure, but what would her being on her period mean for Katana?" He answered quickly. "Well, it would be a -1d4 to all her rolls." "Yes, you heard that right. A permanent bane that would also affect ability checks, just because the character was of the gentler sex, quote unquote." I told him that nobody has ever asked me for something like this, and we have had some players playing a female member of their race. His response? I mean, that's the first thing I thought about when I made this character. Needless to say, the bane of the menstrual cycle was not allowed at the table. Oh boy, this one hit me. If you couldn't tell from my voice, please tell me in the comments if this actually surprises you, by the way. I am a woman, and I do have periods. And while I do understand the logic behind giving the PC a debuff during the time of the month, I don't see why you would want to do that. Do some people consider it to be a vital part of the female experience or something? Because if so, then we should also have a system for men taking increased damage if hit in the groin region. That would be fair. I think, first off, I think it's very weird that that's the first thing you think of when you're making a female character. I've heard people make some weird comments about female characters, but not about their periods. That's usually not the first thing they go for. That's a first one for me. Congrats. Anyways, while I do give props to the player for going all in with their immersion, I suppose, there's a reason why TTRPGs aren't super detailed in their realism. For instance, when was the last time you roleplayed your character going to the bathroom, taking a shower, shaving their armpits, zipping and unzipping their pants every morning? There's some things that are just not fun to roleplay and take up time, so why would you do that? You already do that in the real world every day. Now, if you're someone who wants to roleplay a woman on her period, first off, why? Please tell me why. I need to know why anyone would want to roleplay that very specific thing that women do. But also, don't. For starters, nerfing your character affects the rest of your team, and I doubt many of them are going to be amused by you having a debuff like that, just in case the major boss fight happens during the character's time of the month. Imagine that. Maybe that's why, now that I'm thinking about it, he didn't bring it up at the table with the rest of the party, because he probably knew that that would not go over all that well. By the way, it doesn't mention this, but I'm pretty sure he's the one experienced player in this party. Also, I can see players being uncomfortable with it. I think I would be weirded out by someone wanting to include that particular bit of their biology in the game. I don't know how I would feel about that, actually. I don't think I would allow it. It just seems kind of weird and almost fetishy in a way, because you're not actually experiencing it, right? You're just playing it. That's I don't know, disrespectful, fetishy. I can't place a word to it. I'm sorry. It's just a little weird. Also, I would rather not be reminded that I am bleeding sometimes, especially if I happen to be currently bleeding, like right that day, because that would be insulting if I am in pain and bleeding and you're like, yeah, Katana has a debuff because menstrual cycle. I would be very mad. I am very cranky on my period. Bottom line, these things should be discussed with your DM, but also with the rest of the party. Remember, they are also linked to you. Your actions, your buffs, debuffs, abilities, they affect their experience. They deserve to know these kinds of things, especially if it's a debuff. They need to know. If everyone happens to be okay with it, I can't really stop you. I'm just a random stranger on the internet, so I can't really do anything about it, but I still think it's a little disrespectful. I think some female players would be upset about that, but also, if everyone's okay with it, go for it. But in general, find something else to RP. Killing goblins or something sounds fun. Eh? First time having to kick a player by Ninja Samurai 1995. This happened a few months ago. I was trying to run the Brazilian OSR game Old Dragon, and a player nearly ruined everything. People of this story are me, the GM, Man-in-Arms, Thief, and Wizard. Wizard was the problem. I found him due to him saying he was an autistic player, and being autistic myself, I thought it would be a good experience. Bad idea. First red flag was when I told him that it was a Tolkien-esque world. Chaotic characters were hunted, and mages did not show off their power. To compensate, they would be allowed to use swords and crossbows. The game has no good and evil, just order, neutral, and chaos, and the module had rules to give heavy weapons to mages to give a Gandalf a vibe. Despite my warnings, he created a chaotic character. I talked to him again, and he does not want to change. Then I talk to the group, and they just say, okay, no problem for us. So I let it pass. Then comes the game. Despite my warnings that Wizard shouldn't use magic all the time, he shows off his power, both to gather information that would be easily to obtained otherwise, and in combat. Despite everything, I just keep running the game, and we come to the dungeon. To start, I throw an easy encounter, some goblins guarding a chest. Thief manages to roll and see the goblins, and by that I rule that they can get them by surprise. Despite the advantage, Wizard throws a rock, warning the goblins. Then after combat, he interrupts the interrogation and opens the chest, which had a trap to kill the goblins due to story reasons. If anyone but the BBG opens it, the goblins die because they failed to guard it. They go to town and talk to the alchemist about potions, and the party metagames to get the best ones, which upsets Man-in-Arms. The last straw came after that. I am not good with multitasking. After the game, I was talking with Thief, and apparently, Wizard made a really sexist joke in the chat that I did not see because I was running the game. I simply said he's out. I banned and blocked him right after that. He did not last more than one session. Sadly, due to scheduling and lack of players, the game died shortly after. It's always tough kicking a player out for the first time, or any time really, but the first time is always the hardest. It kicks just that extra bit harder. In this case, it was pretty cut and dry. I think the wizard started off not listening to your lore, which is always a bad sign for things to come. As DMs, yes, we are expected to have a certain degree of flexibility when it comes to character concepts, but that has its limits. This DM has very clearly laid out how things work in this game's world. Chaotic actions are punished, magic isn't supposed to be shown off recklessly. This doesn't mean that the players can't do these things, just there will be consequences. Ideally, that character shouldn't have been allowed in the game. I understand that the party said they don't mind, which is good, but it sounds like the DM was against it and just went along with it because the party said they're okay with it, which is what I have an issue with. The DM is as much a part of the game as the players are, so if the DM isn't in for something, it means you don't have a unanimous decision, and you need to have a unanimous decision for most things in D&D, to avoid resentment and such. It might sound harsh, but if the player is refusing to be even a little bit flexible during character creation, and wants to just play a character that breaks the world and makes things harder for everyone else, maybe they're just not a good fit for this system, or your table, or this group. This doesn't make them a terrible human being, just not a fitting player for your particular game, table, or group. Here, though, it just seems like the guy's a jerk, or really immature. We don't know his age. I don't know how old these people are, but random sexist comments in the chat during the game, first of all, that sounds like something a 14-year-old does. And also that's absolutely enough to get banned at my table. Like, first, no questions asked, get out. No sexism allowed in this neighborhood. Good for you, OP, for getting the guy out. Shame that your game fell apart, but I wish you good luck in your next attempt. Hopefully without a chaotic wizard that time. Our last story for the day, and the customary long one. DM's plot is sacred. Players' choices are arbitrary. By Oddfellow. This is a long one. TLDR at the bottom. About a year ago, I was in this political espionage campaign with 3 other players. Cleric, Sorcerer, and Fighter. I was playing a Barbarian. The basic premise was that we were vigilantes working for a secret organization that helped fight back against the corruption in the city we were based in. First combat, we get our asses handed to us by random thieves. Fellas were armorless, only wearing underwear, dual-wielding daggers. We were level 3. Everybody but me and the sorcerer go down. City guards show up at the last second to save us from immediate TPK. Encounter ties into the plot trademark, which we had a chance to establish ourselves and find our bearings if we're getting put into the ground. A few sessions later, we're on a stealth mission. Me and the fighter lead by quietly incapacitating the guards non-lethally. We get about halfway in. The DM has a guard walk in on us very suddenly and alerts all the guards on the battle map. No opportunities to prevent this, just suddenly happens. Feels bad, but I accepted the DM probably just wanted some combat, moved on. Combat begins and we get attacked by player characters. DM designed 4 player characters, not monster stat blocks, and gave them some goons for the encounter. One-sided corridor shootout ensues. Bad guys have a Shadow Sorcerer that gives us trouble the whole combat. Cleric backs the Shadow Sorcerer into a windowless storage room, locks the door behind him, and casts Silence. Cleric prepares to 1v1 the Shadow Sorcerer. Instead, the DM has Shadow Sorcerer use Shadow Walk, teleports out of the room. Flees combat. DM later admits that they didn't want us to catch the Shadow Sorcerer for plot reasons. Shadow Sorcerer doesn't get that subclass feature until 14th level, and on top of that, they need to be able to see the location they're teleporting to. Why not just say there's someone else? Shadow Sorcerer had a mask on and nobody identified them yet. Just make them a lower level goon so we can interrogate them for details later. Meanwhile, across the map, me and the other melee marshals are pinned by gunmen. Our sorcerer hides, occasionally popping divine subclass heals on us as we run cover to cover to engage the gunmen with melee. We managed to beat 3 tanky gunner melee enemies. Me and Fighter went down multiple times in the process. Party wants to take a break from the critical path, trademark, because it's kicking our asses, so perhaps we just need more experience. We go to a job board for side gigs. Alchemy mishap in a basement. Sounds like fun. Arrive at side gig. Basement full of gelatinous cubes. 4 level 3 heroes go in. There's 20 cubes in the basement, all unadjusted stats. No solutions except fight them. We leave because we nearly TPK. Again. Party discusses with DM that combat is really hard and we don't feel very good, just barely surviving. DM switches over to normal enemy stat blocks. Campaign is fun for a while. Challenges feel fairly balanced. This doesn't last long. Apparently, the DM's takeaway from our talk was that we weren't interested in the story, completely missing the point about difficulty. They just couldn't wrap their head around the fact that we just didn't like how hard the combat was, no matter how clearly we tried to explain it. Much later, Party is on a story quest involving my backstory. We're hunting a rare animal and manage to secure it with me dealing the final blow. Some goons show up, including a gnome and a mech. They have some sinister plans for the magic meat of our quarry, and we get told to give it up or combat ensues. It's tough because we didn't get a long rest between the big hunt combat we just finished. Nobody complains though. We also understand not handing it over would result in combat. We knew the right thing to do was stand up to the bad guys. We just barely win, but at least it was made clear that the option we picked would be harder. We're transporting the animal corpse back to the city. DM triggers a magic item that teleports our cart away with some of the magic meat and my barbarian's arm. DM gave me a choice to consent to losing my arm because the teleportation could slice it off. I agreed mostly because I was going to use that one to roll out a new character and retire my current one. By this point, our sorcerer was seething because he felt like every choice we made didn't actually matter. Like, sure, you can refuse the bad guy's offer, but it just means you've pissed him off and he still gets what he wants. Want to sneak through an encounter? I think you've had enough fun being sneaky. Time for my prepared combat encounter. I retired my barbarian for a new character, and so did cleric. Campaign ended up fizzing out not long after. Ironic how the one choice that stuck was my character losing an arm. TLDR. Level 3 party gets repeatedly beaten down by unbalanced combat. DM is obsessed with keeping their pre-written plot intact and giving us choices that don't actually matter or impact said plot. I'm going to be real for a second here. I don't think the railroading in the story is all that egregious. I know the comments all go around about how this DM is terrible for railroading, but it doesn't feel that way to me. It doesn't say anywhere how long the DM has been running games for, but to me this sounds less like the DM is putting their story before their players and more like someone who is bad at improv. And maybe that's me giving too much credit to the DM, but this is why I'm leaning more towards a lack of experience here. Back when I first started D&D, it was very railroady. I got so extremely upset when my players found a way to sidetrack the plot or use the solution that I hadn't accounted for or hadn't thought of. And it wasn't because I wanted to tell a story specifically and they had to listen to it. It's that I didn't have a good resolution in mind for the things that they were attempting. I was stressed because I had so many things I planned that were epic, and of course the players went for the one thing that I hadn't thought of, hadn't prepared, and now there's going to be annoyance, and they're going to think it's awful, and it's going to be a bad time for everyone, and everyone's going to be bored. So yeah, I got angry and stressed and essentially forced them in one of the boxes I had cool stuff for because I didn't want to disappoint my players and their actions didn't have an as epic effect as they wanted. It took me a good amount of time to understand that first, the players will always do something to break your plans. Always, without fail. It is impossible to account for every possibility that your players might do. Remember, first of all, there's more of them, and generally they're not as inside the problem as you, so they're just throwing random things at the wall, like everything and the kitchen sink is going to solve this issue, and they're vastly more creative than any DM ever. At this point, I've become comfortable enough to try going along with it. Just kind of chilling, waiting for them to give me solutions, thinking of things that happen afterwards in the moment. I am still bad at improv, so I can absolutely understand a new DM's frustration and attempt to keep the story on the path they've prepped for. I don't think it's malice as much as it is, well, incompetence. I think that sounds bad, but it is what it is, right? We all start somewhere. Mind, this is all just speculation on my part. It's just that, to me, this seems like more of a newbie's flailing than actual hardcore railroading. This is my story, you'll listen to it. If you feel otherwise, please let me know in the comments. I would love to get some different opinions and maybe we can have a discussion down there. I do want to know how other people see this issue. Now, the combat difficulty. It was the first thing the OP brought up, and I think it ties to a point I made in a previous story. There's clearly not enough communication being had here between players and DMs and establishing expectations. If the DM wants to run extremely challenging combats, that's fine, that's great. I run very challenging combats, and I also don't do random encounter tables at all because I don't like them. And that's fine, my table enjoys it. Some people like a challenge, while others may want a more easygoing experience like 99% RP, maybe 1% combat and exploration. But it does seem like the DM changed after they were talked to. I think the OP kind of glazes over that. They say that the DM alters the stat blocks, makes them easier to fight, but then the OP also dismisses that entirely and says the DM didn't change. That just seems kind of disingenuous. But, maybe that's confirmation bias in me speaking. Maybe I'm trying too hard to see this DM as a new DM, and that's why I'm seeing all these things. Also, I would like to say, combat balancing is hard. The CR system for 5e is absolute abject garbage. On fire garbage. And sometimes you just throw something at your players that they should, in theory, be able to handle, like an intellect devourer at level 1, and they just don't. It's a fact all DMs have to accept. Sometimes you're going to throw something hard at your players and they will just struggle. You can't always balance everything. You can't account for one of your party members suddenly rolling nothing above an 8 the entire session. He knows who he is. Stuff happens. It's sad that this campaign fizzled out, but maybe it's for the best. May you find a table that fits your needs, OP, and I hope the DM gets better with time if they are in fact a newbie, and I choose to believe that they are. I choose to believe in the good in people. That's all the stories we have for today, folks. Hopefully you found this at least a little bit insightful, hopefully entertaining. Thank you for listening all the way through to the end, and I hope you stick around. Give this video a like if you feel like it, subscribe if you want to see more, leave comments if you agree or disagree with my comments. I am always interested in hearing different perspectives. We can discuss if there's something to be discussed, but I would love to hear from you. Have a good time of day, and I'll catch you later. Cheerios!